That particular Saturday was steeped in a kind of languid stillness, a day where the hands of the clock seemed to drift rather than tick. I was lounging in my apartment, aimlessly navigating the digital currents of my phone, when I noticed a missed call from Liam. He'd left his favorite hoodie at my place after we'd spent the previous night gaming, and he was hoping to get it back. It felt like a minor errand, so I located the soft, worn fabric draped over my desk chair and sent him a quick text letting him know I was on my way. Liam's family lived in a quiet suburb just outside Philadelphia, a simple drive down the Schuylkill Expressway that I'd made countless times. It was never a complicated trip. I was aware that his mother, Sophia, was usually around the house, but she was typically a background presence, either occupied with her own tasks or resting in her room. My perception of her had never extended beyond the simple fact that she was quite striking for her age. She had to be in her early 40s, yet she carried herself with a grace that seemed to defy time. In my mind, she was and had always been simply Liam's mom. That was the beginning and end of it. Nothing more to consider. So when I rapped my knuckles on their front door, I fully expected Liam to swing it open. Instead, it was her. She pulled the door inward, a warm but slightly surprised smile on her face. She was dressed in comfortable-looking yoga pants and a simple t-shirt. Her hair pulled back loosely. She didn't appear flustered or embarrassed by my unannounced arrival, just genuinely caught off guard. I felt my own posture straighten slightly, a subconscious reaction I couldn't explain. "Hey, Noah," she greeted, her voice possessing a smooth, melodic quality. "Liam actually just stepped out to run an errand." She gestured vaguely down the street. "What brings you by?" For a beat, I fumbled with my thoughts, my prepared casual greeting for Liam dissolving on my tongue. I held up the hoodie as if it were a tangible explanation for my presence. I was just dropping this off for him. I didn't realize he wouldn't be here. She let out a soft, low laugh and tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Oh, you're not interrupting anything." Her conversation was light, a gentle back and forth about my work in her garden. But as the minutes stretched on, I noticed her opening up in ways that were entirely new to me. She spoke about the quiet rhythms of her life, the way the days were changing, and how even when the house was full, she sometimes experienced a profound sense of being alone. For a stretch of time, the awareness that I was speaking with my best friend's mother completely faded away. It was just the two of us sharing a moment of unexpected and unvarnished honesty. And the way she held my gaze suggested she was genuinely interested in what I had to say, that my perspective mattered. It was then that a switch flipped somewhere deep inside me. I began to perceive her in a completely different light. There was an entire person there, separate from her role as Liam's mother. She offered a faint, almost enigmatic smile. "Noah, you've grown into such a fine young man," she observed, her voice gentle. "It's hard to wrap my head around. I can still picture you and Liam as little boys causing chaos all over this house." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just offered a small, appreciative nod. A new kind of energy had begun to crackle in the space between us. Something unspoken but palpably there. I could feel it. A low hum of quiet tension, though I was unsure of its meaning. What I did know was that I felt no immediate urge to leave. She rose from her chair and made her way toward the kitchen, saying something about checking on the kettle. I found myself following a few paces behind, drawn by an impulse I didn't bother to analyze. As she moved past me in the narrower space of the kitchen doorway, her arm brushed against mine. It was a fleeting incidental contact, the kind that happens a dozen times a day with strangers in a crowd. I thought nothing of it. But then, as she reached up to open a cabinet for a mug, she shifted her weight and her hip pressed lightly against my side for a second. This time, the contact lingered just a moment longer. It was still subtle enough to be an accident, but it sent a small jolt through my system. I caught the faint, clean scent of her perfume. Some dinner when I saw in a pasta aisle. She was holding a jar of artisanal marinara sauce, studying the label with a small, thoughtful frown creasing her brow. For some reason, that simple, unguarded expression captivated me. How had I never before noticed the natural, understated beauty she possessed? It wasn't just about her physical appearance. It was in the deliberate way she moved, the quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from her. She carried herself as if she were privy to some gentle secret that the rest of the world had yet to discover. I hadn't prepared myself to run into her, and frankly, I was uncertain how I should act. We hadn't spoken since that strange afternoon at her house, the one defined by a hoodie and 2 seemingly accidental brushes in the kitchen. Yet something about that day had resonated with me. Something in her smile and the directness of her gaze had lingered in the back of my mind. I had tried to dismiss it as a one-off, a peculiar moment, until she looked up from the jar and her eyes met mine. "Noah," she said, her voice a soft murmur, accompanied by a calm and inviting smile. It was the kind of voice that had the immediate effect of putting you at ease. I smiled back, making a conscious effort to keep my demeanor casual. "Hello, Sophia. I didn't expect to run into you here." She replied that she was just grabbing a few items for that evening's meal, gesturing with the jar toward her shopping cart. "Do you need any help finding anything?" It was a simple, polite question, yet somehow it blossomed into a full-blown conversation. We stood there in the aisle talking about food, the unpredictable spring weather, and other inconsequential topics. But beneath the surface of our light-hearted chat, there was a thrum of something deeper. A subtle but distinct tension was present in the air between us. It was there in the small lingering glances, the quiet smiles, and then out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you doing anything tonight?" She delivered the question with the studied nonchalance as if the answer held little importance, but I could sense she was carefully testing the waters. I was unsure how to respond. I gave a slight shrug. "Not really, just planning on a quiet night at home." My chest I couldn't quite identify, a feeling as if I were about to step through a door into an entirely unexpected room. When I arrived, the house felt as warm and comforting as it always had. The rich aroma of garlic and herbs wafted from the kitchen, wrapping the space in a warmth that felt almost too welcoming. Sophia was already in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she stirred something in a pan on the stove. I paused in the doorway, simply watching her for a moment, and that's when it truly hit me. The woman standing before me didn't feel like the Sophia I had known for years. She looked the same, of course, but something in her posture and her presence felt more authentic, more open. "Go ahead and have a seat," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready." I sat down at the small table in her kitchen, trying to project an ease I didn't feel. She moved around the kitchen with an effortless grace, as if she belonged in that space in every conceivable way. Meanwhile, I sat there trying to decipher the complex cocktail of emotions churning inside me. It wasn't just about how she looked or how at ease she seemed. It was about how she made me feel, as if I were more than just her son's friend, but a person she was genuinely interested in knowing. We ate and the conversation flowed with a surprising ease. There were no awkward lulls or forced attempts at small talk. We spoke about life and its tendency to rarely unfold according to plan. She talked about her younger years before marriage and motherhood and how she sometimes missed the thrill of spontaneity, the feeling of being genuinely excited about the unknown. She confessed that with Liam being out of the house more and more, her life had settled into a predictable, monotonous pattern. There was a raw edge to her voice when she said it. It sounded as if she were finally releasing words that had been held back for years, admitting that everything wasn't as perfect as it appeared on the surface. I just listened. I didn't offer any profound advice or deep philosophical insights. I simply nodded and created a space for her to speak. And even as I sat there in silence, I was noticing things. I saw the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about a topic she was passionate about. I heard the genuine, uninhibited sound between us, something we didn't need to acknowledge out loud. When it was time for me to leave, she gave me a hug at the door. It was simple, relaxed, and warm, but her hand lingered for a second too long on the small of my back, and that single brief moment of contact stayed with me. "Take care, Noah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My mind was spinning as I walked back to my car. The evening had felt so normal on the surface, and yet it had managed to unlatch something deep inside me. I couldn't put a name to it. She hadn't done anything overtly improper, but the way she looked at me, The way she listened, it made me feel as if there was something real developing between us, a connection of a different kind. I had been to Liam's house 100 times before, but this was not the same. And I hated how much I found myself replaying it in my mind in the days that followed. I tried to force it out of my head. I tried to pretend that nothing significant had happened. A few days later, Liam called and asked if I wanted to meet up for a drink. I thought that getting out might help clear my head, but as soon as I walked into the dimly lit bar in Minunk, I saw Sophia sitting at a high-top table with a few of her friends. She spotted me almost immediately, and her face broke into a smile as she gave a small wave. Without thinking, I waved back. Her smile was relaxed, yet it held a warmth that hadn't been there before. A new familiarity. An unspoken acknowledgement passed between us that made my stomach do a slow, nervous flip. "Hey, Noah," she said as I approached their table. "I didn't expect to see you out tonight." I shrugged, trying to affect an air of nonchalance. "Just meeting up with Liam. I didn't realize you'd be here." She let out a light laugh. "Yeah, I'm trying to catch up with some old friends. It's been a while since I've had a night out." Her eyes held mine for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary. And just like that, the tension was back. That subtle undercurrent was humming between us again, always present just beneath the surface of our casual interactions. I should have walked away then. I should have said it was nice to see her and gone to find a spot. Aloud. Then at one point, Liam got up to head to the bar for another round, leaving just the two of us at the table. I hadn't planned on saying anything of substance, but the words seemed to emerge of their own accord. "So, Sophia, how have you really been?" She paused, her smile fading slightly. For a moment, I saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes. "I'm doing okay," she said, her voice quiet. "Just I've been feeling a little lonely lately." Her honesty caught me off guard. It was as if she had peeled back another layer, revealing a person I hadn't expected to find. Someone who was far more complex than just Liam's mother. "Yeah," I replied, nodding slowly. "I can understand that. It's not always easy." She returned my comment with a quiet nod of her own, and we sat in silence for a few moments. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, almost serene. I wanted to say something more, something to console her, to lighten the burden she was clearly carrying, but the right words wouldn't come. So, I just looked at her, wondering how much she was truly revealing and whether she was hinting at something deeper. Liam returned with our drinks and the moment was broken. But something inside me had been moved. That night, my perception of Sophia underwent a final, irreversible transformation. She no longer felt like just a friend's parent. There was a different kind of light surrounding her now, a magnetic, almost perilous kind. Later, when we all decided to head home, I walked with Liam to his car, but my thoughts were fixated on that brief, private conversation I'd had with her. What exactly did she mean by lonely? Was it a simple statement of fact, or was she gently asking for something more? As soon as I got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto my couch and replayed the entire night in my head. That dinner, that was a confession. That look in her eyes at the bar. It was then that I realized this wasn't just some random series of encounters. There was something else developing between us. Something unspoken and powerful. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was being drawn into it. The scariest be dismissed. The way she smiled, the way she carried herself, it all felt different now, charged with a new significance. That Saturday, I decided I had to clear my head. I called Liam and suggested we go for a run on the Schuylkill River Trail. It was something we used to do all the time. Maybe if I physically exhausted myself, I could quiet the noise in my mind. When I arrived at the trail entrance, Liam was already there stretching. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. "About time, man. You're late," he teased, falling into a light jog beside me. I forced a smile and mumbled something about hitting traffic. We ran hard for the next hour, the familiar rhythm of our feet on the pavement a steady beat beneath our conversation. We joked, talked some trash, and pushed each other to go faster. But my mind wasn't really in it. I was somewhere else entirely. A place that was warm, soft, and deeply perplexing. Ironically, after a while, we slowed to a walk and then sat on a bench overlooking the river to cool down. Out of the blue, Liam asked, "You think my mom is doing okay?" He wiped the sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and stared out at the water. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "She's just been distant lately," he said, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Not her usual self. I don't know if she's stressed or what, but something feels off. I think she's going through something." That observation landed with more force than I had anticipated. I had always perceived Sophia as a pillar of composure, a steady presence who was never rattled or uncertain. But perhaps I have been wrong. "I don't know," I said, keeping my tone non-committal. "Have you talked to her about it?" He shook his head. "Not really. Every time I try, she just brushes it off. I don't want to push her, but I can just tell she's not totally fine." I wasn't sure what to say. A part of me felt an urge to come clean, to tell him about the subtle shifts I had felt and witnessed, the transformation that was occurring in both her and me. But I couldn't, not yet. Maybe not ever. "Maybe she just needs some space," I offered, attempting to sound casual for a beat before nodding. "Yeah, just been one of those long weeks." I could tell she was deflecting, treating it as if it were nothing. I didn't challenge her on it, mostly because I had no idea how. My heart was pounding in my chest. A drum beat louder than I wanted to admit. So I retreated to the kitchen. I needed a moment to breathe, to escape the emotional weight that was hanging in the living room. But, as I was reaching into a cabinet for a glass, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Sophia was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Noah," she said quietly, her voice calm yet direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" I turned around, startled by her sudden appearance. Yeah, sure. What's up?" She stepped into the kitchen and gently closed the door behind her. The space between us shrank, and I felt my chest tighten as she moved closer. I wanted to thank you for the other night," she said, her gaze not quite meeting mine. "It really meant a lot to me." I swallowed hard, her words hitting me with more force than I expected. "Of course," I managed to reply. "You know I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." She nodded slowly, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We were suspended in a dense, heavy silence that buzzed with everything we weren't saying. Then, almost as if to deflect from the intensity of the moment, she said, "Liam's a great kid. You know, he's been through his share of challenges, but he has such a good heart." I nodded again, unsure of where this was headed, but her gaze lingered on me for an extra second. That same spark I had felt before was back, humming between us like an over-tightened wire. "Yeah," I replied softly. "He really does." She smiled, but there was something else in that smile, something I couldn't quite decipher. I wondered if she was thinking the same thing I was, and for a fleeting second I considered asking her. I almost asked what was happening between us, but I held back. I just stood there caught in the quiet intimacy of the kitchen with her, wondering where we were supposed to go from here. Finally, she broke the spell with a quiet, "Thank you again, Noah." "Anytime," I responded. Way her head tilted when she was listening intently. The way her eyes would meet mine for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I felt it. Then came Saturday. Liam had made plans to go out with his college friends, leaving me at their house by myself for a while as I waited for him to get ready. It wasn't what I had anticipated, but I didn't mind. In truth, I needed the solitude. I needed space to try and process the storm of thoughts and feelings in my head. I was sitting on the living room couch scrolling through my phone when I heard her voice call my name from the hallway. "Noah." I looked up, surprised to see her standing there. Her expression was unreadable. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart had already started to race. She walked into the room, paused for a moment, and then asked, "Can we talk?" That simple question made my stomach clench. "Yeah, of course," I said, setting my phone down on the cushion beside me. She came over and sat down on the couch, not right next to me, but close. The distance between us was barely a few inches, but the air felt thick and heavy. The room suddenly seemed smaller. "I've been thinking a lot about our recent conversations," she began, her voice soft and cautious. "And I think I owe you an apology." I looked at her, completely taken aback. This was not the direction I had expected this conversation to go. "I know I've been a little forward," she continued, explaining that she'd been dealing with some personal things and hadn't meant to put any of that on me. I blinked, trying to read her face for the true meaning behind her words. "I mean, it's fine," I finally managed to say. "You don't have to apologize for anything." She offered a warm smile at that, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't entirely convinced by her own apology. There was more she wasn't saying. "I appreciate you saying that," she responded, "but I feel like I may have crossed a boundary with you." My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I had been both dreading. And if I looked at her, my mind racing in 1,000 different directions at once. Every rational part of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I should get up and leave, that I shouldn't be in this position. And yet there I was, completely still. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said, my voice barely steady, trying to keep the entire situation from spiraling out of control. "But I honestly don't know what you want me to say." She met my gaze then, her eyes direct and unwavering. We sat in silence for a long moment. The quiet was dense, laden with all the things we couldn't bring ourselves to say out loud. Then she reached out. Her hand brushed against mine on the couch cushion. A touch so soft it was barely there, but it felt like an electric current. Sent a shock wave through my entire body. My breath caught in my throat, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. "This isn't just me being lonely, Noah," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. "I'm not sure what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." A tidal wave of emotions washed over me all at once. Guilt, curiosity, desire, and a profound sense of fear. I was acutely aware of the risk. I knew what could happen if anyone ever found out about this, but I also knew that the connection between us was undeniable, and a significant part of me didn't want it to stop. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice wavering. "I mean, with everything, whatever this is." She nodded, her fingers curling around mine, her grip firm and certain. "I'm sure." And with that single affirmation, the invisible line we had been so carefully dancing around was erased. We didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. The air, however, had changed. We both felt the shift, the immense weight of what we had just acknowledged. Everything was different after that. It has been a full year since that night. A year of us choosing to keep a secret. A year spent balancing the performance of our normal lives with the quiet, stolen moments we carved out for ourselves. In some ways, it feels as though we've lived deserved to know. I knew the truth would shatter him. But because carrying the secret of this magnitude always leaves a mark. Nevertheless, I never truly second-guessed the choice we made. We both made it together. And no matter how chaotic or complicated things felt, being with her always felt right. Sophia and I saw each other whenever we could, which was never as often as we wanted. We never pushed the boundaries of our arrangement. We kept everything discreet, quiet, and far from prying eyes. The most difficult part was the pretense. Liam would be in the room laughing and talking, completely oblivious, and we would have to act as if we were nothing more than his mother and his best friend. We kept our hands to ourselves, our conversations polite and neutral. But those small stolen moments, the quick, meaningful glance across a room, the discreet smile that was meant only for me, the fleeting brush of our hands when no one was looking, they became our lifeline. Those were the things that sustained us. When we were alone in our house, we would sometimes talk about what might happen if the truth ever came out. We never had a concrete plan, just hazy what-ifs and half-formed ideas. We didn't dwell on it for long, though. We chose to stay in the present, in the quiet, in between spaces where we didn't have to justify our existence to anyone, where we could simply be. It was a calm Saturday evening, almost exactly a year after our secret relationship began. I was back at Sophia's house, sitting on the couch, the very same spot where it had all started. The house was peaceful. Liam was out for the night, so we had the place to ourselves once again. Everything felt normal now, comfortable in a way that had once been so foreign. We had learned how to exist in this state of quiet, careful connection. We no longer needed to constantly talk about our feelings. The relationship had settled into something steady, something real. It was and always would be unconventional, but it had become something I couldn't imagine giving up. Sophia sat beside me, looking as lovely as she always did. But there was a softness about her now, an ease in her body, and a serenity in her expression that hadn't been there a year ago. It had taken time, but we had learned how to bear the weight of what we shared. We had the same time. It feels like this was always where we were headed, as if this was somehow meant to be. I nodded slowly, my hand finding hers and lacing our fingers together. Yeah, it's weird, I said. But it's the good kind of weird. I never expected my life to look like this, but now that I'm here, I wouldn't change a thing. She tilted her head up, meeting my gaze with that same look that always seemed to make the world around us stand still. Me neither, she replied softly. Given the circumstances, I think we've done pretty well. I'm glad we kept it between us. Her voice was firm. Sure, it's ours. It's just for us. And she was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something we had built quietly, carefully, and together. I'm happy, I said softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. We're happy. That's what matters. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there side by side, enveloped in a silence that didn't need filling. The only sound was the faint, steady ticking of the clock on the wall. A year had passed, a whole year of hiding in plain sight. We had somehow made it work. We had kept the secret. We had protected what we had. And through it all, we had held on to the one thing that mattered most, each other. As the evening wore on and the sky outside deepened to indigo, one thought became clear in my mind. This is how I wanted things to stay. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and strange and difficult, but it was ours.